I've just done my review of Spider-Man, no spoilers. I thought I'd do an extra video and just talk about, well, some of the big plot points that came out of this film, because there's a lot to talk about. First of all, massive warning, there are spoilers all over the shop in this video. I can't stress enough, if you haven't seen the film, don't watch this video. At the same time, please watch the video. Straight out the gate, a lot of the rumours were true about everything that happens in this film. For one, you've got the two old Spider-Man actors coming back. Tobey Maguire from Sam Raimi's films and Andrew Garfield both came back. And not just in small cameos either, they are a pretty integral part of the third act of this film. Did I like how they were brought in? Kind of. I think this kind of harks back to what I was talking about in the review, where the screenwriters knew what they wanted to do and they just kind of were like, and then Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire show up. There isn't really too much cleverness to how they're brought in. Andrew Garfield, for one, his films aren't amazing, but I think he gets a lot of stick for actually him doing quite a good job in those movies. They're not perfect, but he has a really good characterization of Spider-Man in them. It was very crowd-pleasing when he came back. This was when a lot of the folks around me were cheering and clapping, and even though I haven't got a lot of love for those films, I did sort of get swept up in him coming back. He was in some quite dark films, but his lighter version of Peter fits in really well in the MCU, and his sort of humour slots in pretty nicely. I was a little bit, I don't want to say disappointed, but yeah, maybe a little bit disappointed with Tobey Maguire in this film. Not because I don't think he's good. I think they tried to give him some of the quips which didn't really fit with his style of Peter Parker. That was a little bit of a shame. They were trying to kind of Marvelise him. Nevertheless, I absolutely loved those films that he was in, so it was really good to see him coming back. One thing they kind of touch upon is that he is an older Spider-Man than Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland at this point. He's been Spider-Man for a lot longer at this point. And you get a sense of the fact that he's maybe a bit more world-wearied, but I would have liked to see them get introduced at the beginning of the film and maybe have the whole film as the three of them and really flesh out those characters a bit more. I would have liked that more than having all the villains come back, because to be honest, if you just had one bad guy from each of their worlds come back, you could have Green Goblin and Electro even. I think that would have rounded things out pretty nicely. And then you could have spent more time developing the characters of these villains and the Spider-Men that are returning. I really wanted to see, was he still happy to be Spider-Man? Was it taking a toll on him? You get the sense that he's worked things out with his MJ in the films, but nothing else really comes of that. You think, oh, he's been Spider-Man for 15, 20 years, but that's about it, really. Where it is great to see him is he actually is the one that stops Tom Holland killing Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin at the end. I thought that was really good, because you sort of got the idea that he knows what a toll that's going to take on Tom Holland, and he really steps up to that kind of mentor level. But then I thought the film kind of did a bit of a bait and switch when he gets stabbed by the Green Goblin, and in the end him getting stabbed really came to absolutely nothing, because he was fine, quipped about it a second later, and then next thing you know, booted back to his universe. I think that would have been really interesting if maybe Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker died and Tom Holland had to have that on his conscience. Maybe the idea that he still did the right thing, but it was at a cost. I'd say one thing that really did make me smile was Andrew Garfield getting to save MJ. The very much maligned Amazing Spider-Man 2, where Gwen Stacy dies. You really feel like that has actually had consequences on Andrew Garfield, and in turn him getting a second opportunity to save this life. That, even though it was 5-10 seconds, was really a great moment, and I think everyone really felt that he'd got some redemption in that moment. One quick thing from near the start of the film, Charlie Cox returns as Daredevil from the Marvel Netflix show. He appears for like a split second. Really didn't have any bearing on the film, apart from, Marvel is saying, look who's back. That sort of, I suppose, ties in a bit with the Hawkeye show that's going on at the moment. If you've been watching that, you know what I'm talking about. Nice little moment for the fans. One thing I did wonder, he knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man at this point. Why doesn't he just tell him that he is Daredevil? Maybe they could fight crimes together. I don't know. Yeah, one of the biggest moments in the whole film is when Aunt May dies. That's a real fresh take on it. We've not seen that in any of the films. Treading carefully here. Not in the films. It's always been Uncle Ben who's died. I suppose that raises questions. Did Uncle Ben also get killed by some bad guys? I don't know. But I know it was pretty emotional to see Aunt May go. I think not necessarily Marissa Tomei. I think she's been fine in this series, but her Aunt May hasn't really had too much to do. I think really it's all about the symbolism of Aunt May, this critical character to Peter being killed off. I will say, when it happened, I thought Marvel had literally pulled the plug on it. The way she gets smashed in the back with that glider, and then just gets up, and then also gets blown up, and then gets up, I was like, no. I thought that was weak for a second, but yeah, fair play, they did follow through on it. She doesn't have any superpowers. She probably would have been obliterated by that bomb, as would Tom Holland's head, I suppose, because he didn't have his mask on. But that then, I thought, did a good job of basically turning the whole moral issue of what Tom Holland's Spider-Man has tried to do in the film. He's been trying to save all these quote-unquote bad guys, and now he basically just wants to straight up and murder one of them. Yeah, I enjoyed that little twist. Definitely going to be interesting to see how that affects him going forwards, I suppose. Probably the other thing I want to talk about is the ending. Doctor Strange's spell basically removes... let me try and think about this. I think he removes the memory of Peter Parker from existence. I suppose everyone still knows that there is a Spider-Man, but no one knows anything about Peter Parker. That was really interesting because, well, all the MCU films have not shown Peter Parker as a solitary figure like he was in Raimi's Spider-Man or even The Amazing Spider-Man, because who knew that the Spider-Man in those was Peter Parker? Only Gwen for a little bit in Amazing Spider-Man. Well, both films, I suppose. And MJ in the first film. But in the MCU, we've had all the superheroes knowing Spider-Man's identity. Ned, MJ, Aunt May found out in the very first film. This kind of was him making that sacrifice, I suppose, wasn't it? Because he decided to throw away the family that he's always had for the greater good, so that he can go back to being Spider-Man. And even in the final scene, he doesn't tell MJ and Ned again when he meets them. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens going forward. Are they going to recast Tom Holland? I know at the moment it's a bit unsure whether he's going to return, but I can't really see that happening. I think it's just a bit of a reset, maybe. They're going to take that homecoming story that has gone on up to this point and do something a bit new and move it in a different direction. That's going to be good to see. If anything, it's taking him back to basics, because until now he's always had Stark technology, and Happy Hogan's been there to fly him around in the jet. And now we're just going back to a world where Peter Parker is super smart and he doesn't have any crazy gadgets, he doesn't have any instant kill, he just gets shit done by himself. And finally, I'll mention it very quickly, Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock and Venom in the post-credits scene. I'll be honest, I don't really care much for what Sony has done with Venom. For me, I used to absolutely love the 90s animated Spider-Man adventures, and that for me, I think from what I understand, that's meant to be pretty close to the comics, that version of Venom. And that is what Venom should be, shouldn't he? He should be a bad guy. I don't like this idea that Sony's like, oh yeah, let's make everyone into an anti-hero. It's just a bit weird. It's a bit of cheddar cheese is what it is. And ultimately, they just tried to give Venom and Eddie Brock that kind of quippy Marvel-style dialogue, but I think that was pretty weird. The implication I took from this was that maybe Tom Hardy isn't going to be the crossover one. Maybe what it is Sony and Marvel have had their cake and eaten it too. You've got the Tom Hardy and Venom, who's going to continue to be Venom in Sony Venom films, But then they left a little bit of symbiote, so maybe symbiote. I don't know how you say it. They've left a little bit of that in the MCU, so now maybe Marvel can do a different take on Venom. For me, I'd be perfectly okay with that. I like Tom Hardy, but I don't really think Eddie Brock in those Venom films brings much high quality, should we say. So if this means we can get back to a big bad Venom, I still think we're waiting to see him done properly. Let's see what happens going forwards. So those are a bit of my kind of off-the-cuff thinkings of Spider-Man No Way Home. Let me know what you thought, and I'll catch you guys in the next.